Oh, hi Jack, how's it going?
Good, thank you. And how are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. In Berlin on a slightly cloudy day, but it's not too bad.
Well, I'm in Manchester on a very cloudy day, but that's quite normal, so
Okay,
I'm not
yeah.
complaining.
Yeah. Sweet. So, yeah, thank you for joining us. You're our third indie author that we're interviewing for our indie author interviews. And yeah, it's just getting insight from indie authors and advice on the self-publishing process. And you went through it, very recently. So I'm really excited to talk to you and get your insights into the experience.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, nice. So you recently released your new book, The Liberty Arms. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? What can readers expect from this story?
Yeah, so it's set in London or the UK after a revolution has taken place, a left-wing revolution, and there's been some pushback against this by the ruling classes, you might say, and so we ended up in this kind of civil war situation, unofficial civil war. And the story follows two main characters. One who would like to do the right thing, but is not sure what that right thing is. And another character who is absolutely convinced that she's doing the right thing. She's a fervent believer in the revolution. She'll do whatever it takes to achieve her aims. And the story kind of follows these two characters, how the one tries to manipulate the other, and how they work out that conflict. And it goes back in time to explore their pasts and why they kind of arrived at the world views that they have today.
Oh, great. So you get some flashbacks into their background in
Yeah,
time.
there's actually three kind of parallel storylines really, like one in the present and then two in their kind of respective pasts, and their respective pasts meet as well in the past as well.
Oh, cool. Okay, so it all intertwines nicely.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah, that's the
Yeah,
idea.
that's the goal. Cool. And would you say it's a dystopian novel? Is that a good phrase to use?
It probably is a good phrase. It's not how I didn't intend it to be a dystopian novel, really. But I decided to set it in this country. Like originally, I thought maybe I'd set it in a different country where there had actually been a revolution and a civil war. And then I thought, well, maybe it'd be more interesting to set it in this country and explore kind of speculatively what might happen if things that we kind of see on the news happening in other countries were actually to happen today. So it wasn't deliberately a dystopian novel, but I guess if you imagine that you're in a situation where there's been a revolution and a civil war, that's probably some kind of dystopia. So to
Hmm.
most people anyway.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I guess especially in the British setting. Yeah. Is that a genre that interests you? Is it, inspired by dystopian novels that you've read?
It is an interesting genre, I think, because uh, well, it's again kind of speculative, I guess, generally, and I think speculative fiction allows you to kind of explore what might happen, and that's really interesting to me. Um, I kind of would like to write a utopian novel because there's obviously a lot of dystopian fiction, and I think it'd be interesting to see imagine a kind of better future rather than a worse future. But I think that's more difficult because it's hard for readers to get excited about a character in a world where everything's perfect and there's nothing to fight against. So it's a harder thing to do. But I'd quite like to do that in the future if I could.
Yeah, that sounds good, definitely. So The Liberty Arms is the first book in the New Society trilogy. That's correct.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's correct. Yeah.
yeah. What are your plans for the next two books? Do you have them already outlined in your mind? Do you know what's gonna go on next?
No, I have no idea. I actually never have an idea when I'm writing something, so I start off with a situation or a character and then just kind of see where it
Mhm.
goes. I do have I do have I do certainly have ideas of what I like to explore, and it will continue to follow. It will pick up where the first book left off. The second book will pick up where the first book left off, and follow the aftermath of what has happened at the end of the first book. But it will also explore more of the pasts of the characters because I'm interested in exploring how this revolution has taken place and how it's affected people as it was taking place.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because that's kind of what Rachel's story is, right? It's a prequel to The Liberty Arms.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So that again is in a similar way I wanted to explore. I mean, Rachel is the mother of one of the main characters in the Liberty Arms. So we already had a bit of her in the first book, but not from her perspective. And I wanted to go into more detail about how the revolution has taken place and maybe how it affected Benson, the main character in the first book, how it affected his worldview, his childhood in
Mm.
Rachel's story.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I think it's always fun to get yeah, the before story, the original insights into the intentions of the characters. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah, cool. Um, so the first book you ever wrote was quite different, I believe. From the title, it was "Hold the Dog!" exclamation mark. 16 days in Mongolia. I'm so intrigued just by the title. Yeah, can you tell us a bit about that? Is it similar to the Liberty Arms?
No, it's completely different. So that is it's a travelogue basically. I guess you might describe it. It's an account of a real trip that I made in Mongolia 15 years ago now, and I wrote the book 10 years ago. Um, yes, and it is literally an account of, as it says on the title, 16 days in Mongolia. The hold the dog refers to the Mongolian way of entering a gur. So a gur is like a yurt, a big tent that the nomads live in Mongolia. And when you enter a gur and you stand outside, instead of knocking on the door, you shout out the Mongolian for hold the dog because they all have dogs, and if they don't hold the dog will rush out and I guess attack you as you're trying to come in. So that's the reason for the title. Um, and the book is yeah, nothing like the Liberty Arms. It's I guess a humorous, but also not entirely humorous, but a lot of the time I intended to be humorous description of this kind of eventful trip that I had in
Fantastic. Yeah, it's such a good title. It's so interesting.
Mongolia. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so intrigued about Mongolia. I've heard so many good travel stories. I'd really, really love to go there.
Yeah, fascinating place. It's probably changed a lot in the last 15 years, but it was a fascinating place to be at that time.
I still feel like it's still relatively, unexplored by travelers.
I think it probably is compared to most places. What was interesting to me was that there's no, I think people call it like the land without fences or something. There's no, outside of the main city or the towns, the land is kind of open. So we were traveling around in a Jeep and there's no roads. You just drive across the grasslands in whichever way the driver wants to go. And then you end up suddenly at this kind of gur camp and you pay $5 a night or something, and you can stay in there as a guest from the families and things. Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, brilliant. Cool. Yeah, I'd like to read it. Um, was that when you first started writing in Mongolia, or has writing been a big part of your life before then?
Um, it was the first thing that I wrote. Certainly, they ended up being published, but it was the first thing that longer thing that I wrote. Um, and I didn't really write fiction until maybe 5 years ago, when I did a creative writing course in London, just an evening class like run by the council, and that was the first time I started writing fiction. I think before then I'd had the idea, I'd wanted to for quite some time, but I'd never had the courage to kind of do it.
Mm, yeah. Okay, fair enough. Does it come naturally to you, or do you think that, taking this writing class was, learning a craft and a skill that you've now developed over time?
I think that I I think the writing class, like I say, it was only an evening class for 10 weeks, but it taught me a lot just in the basics that it gave me the tools to start doing it, I think. And I think it enabled me to think of myself as somebody who could do it. Whereas before that, I think I always felt like maybe I was an outsider and it wasn't, I'm a chemical engineer by training, so it was some way off that. And I remember going to the first evening class that I went to, I felt really kind of vulnerable and really like an outsider in this class, like I didn't belong. And then the first time that we had homework every week and I read out a piece and got some feedback, suddenly I felt more like an insider and that I could actually do it. Not that it was necessarily very good, but that I could actually do it. And then that really helped.
Mm. Yeah, it's so interesting about the vulnerability of reading out your own writing. I think that's a really important step that many writers go through. I remember the first time I, read out my writing in front of other people, and I was so nervous. And now I feel like I do it all the time, and I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
really think about it. And yeah, it's just so important to get your work out there and just read it and then improve on it. So.
Yeah, getting feedback from other people is so useful. And just the act of reading it out yourself. I mean, reading it, I think I find reading work out myself just to myself really helps. But then actually doing it to other people obviously is a whole different.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, interesting.